What if the street you walk today once carried both chains and the first promises of freedom? Welcome to Robert's History. I'm Robert, and tonight we step back into the New York of the 1700s, a city of ambition, struggle, and quiet resilience. If you enjoy thoughtful journeys into the past, I invite you to subscribe and join our growing community. Please note that some images in this video are symbolic and may not perfectly match every detail, and I truly appreciate your understanding. I hope this story brings you reflection, nostalgia, and a few peaceful moments. To step into New York in the early 1700s is to enter a place filled with contradiction. Long before it became a skyline of glass and steel, it was a British colony shaped by rolling hills, forests, and tidal creeks. The Lenape people had called it Mannahatta, the island of many hills, and for generations it was their homeland. By the start of the 18th century, however, European settlement had transformed both the land and its future. New York was already laying the groundwork for ideas that would later define the United States, including representative government and civil debate. Yet those early foundations of liberty were built alongside slavery and the steady dispossession of native communities. If we look closely, we see a small port town struggling to define itself, carrying both ambition and injustice in equal measure. Before New York was a colony, it was home to an estimated 15,000 Lenape people living in dozens of communities across Mannahatta and the surrounding region. By 1700, that number had fallen to roughly 200 in the New York area. The scale of that loss is difficult to comprehend. European diseases such as smallpox spread rapidly among populations with no immunity. Armed conflict, environmental disruption, and the expansion of colonial settlements compounded the devastation. There was also a profound cultural misunderstanding about land. Europeans treated land as private property that could be permanently bought and sold. The Lenape understood land as shared and seasonal, tied to use rather than ownership. What colonists recorded as legal transactions often meant something entirely different to the people who lived there. Over time, the Lenape were pushed westward into New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and beyond, eventually forced far from their original homeland. Yet their presence remains woven into the city through names like Manhattan and places shaped by ancient native trails. When we walk those streets today, we are moving across a landscape that still carries their story. By the early 18th century, New York had become one of the most diverse towns in British North America. Dutch families who had settled during the earlier New Netherland period still lived alongside English officials, German artisans, and French Huguenot refugees seeking religious freedom. Different languages were spoken in the streets, and churches of various traditions stood within walking distance of one another. Yet this diversity existed within a sharply divided social order. Enslaved Africans made up about 20% of the city's population, and their labor sustained households, docks, and workshops. Wealth and opportunity were unevenly distributed, and legal rights were not shared equally. When we imagine this early city, we should picture both cultural variety and deep inequality existing side by side. In 1711, city officials established a public slave market at the foot of Wall Street, formalizing what had already become central to New York's economy. Enslaved men, women, and children were bought and sold in the open, their labor woven into households, construction projects, and the busy waterfront. By the mid-18th century, thousands of enslaved Africans lived in the city, and slavery touched nearly every neighborhood. Tensions erupted in 1741 after a series of fires sparked fear of a planned uprising. What followed was mass hysteria. Dozens of black residents were arrested, and 13 were executed by burning, with many others hanged. Historians now question the evidence behind the alleged conspiracy. When we stand on Wall Street today, It is worth remembering that this ground once witnessed both human suffering and, later, the birth of a new nation. Life in 18th century New York was physically demanding and often dangerous. The city had no modern sanitation system, and wells could easily become contaminated. Water was not always safe to drink, especially in crowded areas near the docks. Disease spread quickly, and life expectancy was short by modern standards. Many people did not live to see old age, a reality that shaped how families worked, saved, and survived. Because clean water was unreliable, beer, cider, and rum were common daily drinks for many residents. Taverns became essential, gathering places where news was shared and political ideas debated. Rum distilleries thrived on imported molasses, tying local habits to the wider Atlantic trade. When we picture this early city, we should imagine not only hardship, but also crowded tavern rooms filled with conversation and determination. New York's rise in the 18th century was closely tied to the Atlantic world. Its harbor, deep and well-positioned, connected the colony to Britain, the Caribbean, and other parts of North America. Ships carried timber and wheat from the surrounding countryside, helping the colony earn a reputation as a breadbasket within the British Empire. In return, merchants imported goods such as sugar and molasses, which supported a growing rum industry along the waterfront. Maritime trade shaped daily life. Dock workers, sailors, merchants, and craftsmen depended on the steady rhythm of arriving vessels. Wealth began to concentrate among trading families, while the port itself expanded in activity and influence. When we look at today's global city, we can still sense that early ambition rooted in a harbor that linked a small colonial town to a vast ocean economy. Even in its early years, New York was slowly reshaping its landscape. In 1700, the completion of King's Bridge created a physical link between Manhattan and the mainland, strengthening trade and communication to the north. What had once been a patchwork of trails and farmland began to take on clearer lines of connection. One of the most enduring transformations involved an old native pathway known as the Wickwasgeck Trail. Over time, it became Broadway, now one of the most famous avenues in the world. The old post road also stretched outward, marked by milestones that guided mail and travelers between cities. When we walk these routes today, we are following paths that began centuries ago, layered with memory and movement. In 1735, New York became the stage for a trial that would echo far beyond the colony. John Peter Zanger, a printer, had published articles criticizing the royal governor. Under British law at the time, even truthful criticism could be considered libel. Zenger was arrested and brought to trial in a tense political climate where public dissent was risky. His lawyer, Andrew Hamilton, argued that truth should be a defense against libel. The jury agreed and acquitted Zenger. The decision did not immediately change British law, but it set a powerful precedent in the colonies. Over time, the case became a symbol of press freedom and the right to challenge authority. When we talk about open debate today, this small courtroom moment still feels remarkably close to us. When the Revolutionary War reached New York in 1776, the city quickly became one of its central battlegrounds. After the Battle of Long Island, British forces took control of Manhattan and would occupy the city until 1783. For 7 difficult years, New York served as the main British military and political base in North America. Streets once filled with merchants and dock workers were crowded with soldiers, refugees, and uncertainty. Many loyalists, who remained faithful to the crown, sought safety there, while patriots either fled or operated in secrecy. The harbor also held one of the war's darkest realities. Thousands of captured American soldiers were confined on British prison ships anchored in Wallabout Bay. Conditions were harsh, and many died from disease and neglect. When we picture that occupied city, it feels less like distant history and more like a community divided, waiting for its future to be decided. In 1789, New York stood at the center of a new experiment in government. Under the Constitution, it became the first capital of the United States. At Federal Hall on Wall Street, George Washington took the oath of office as the nation's first president. The moment was solemn and uncertain, filled with hope rather than guarantees. Within that same building, the first Congress met. The Supreme Court was established, and the Bill of Rights was drafted and sent to the states for ratification. It is difficult not to reflect on the symbolism of that location. Only decades earlier, enslaved people had been bought and sold nearby. Now the language of liberty and rights was being debated on the same street. When we stand there today, we are reminded that the American story has always carried both contradiction and aspiration side by side. As I reflect on this chapter of New York's past, I am reminded that history is rarely simple. It carries both achievement and injustice, and I believe we honor the present best when we face both honestly. Thank you for spending this time with me. I would truly love to hear your thoughts and perspectives in the comments. If this journey meant something to you, please consider subscribing to Robert's History so we can continue exploring the past together.